Hey everybody, my name is Philip. Earlier this year I decided to read the Bible from front to end, all the way through, and I really just wanted to capture on video a little bit of a journal so that I can share some of that journey with you all. Really the intention for me is to just learn more about the character of God and see what lessons that He might have for me that I can live out in my life. So I hope these videos are beneficial to you in some way, and I hope you enjoy them. Welcome back. We are continuing our journey through 2 Kings, and we pick up today in chapter 14. Chapter 14. So we've basically got two nations, Judah and Israel, and we're going to talk a little bit about each of those in chapter 14 today. So let me summarize this for you. At the beginning of chapter 14, in the kingdom of Judah, a young man named Amaziah, he's the son of Joash, you remember the kid that was saved and became king at the age of 7? So his son Amaziah, he ascends the throne at the age of 25, and he rules from Jerusalem for 29 years. So what does the Bible say about Amaziah? Well, in verse 3 and 4 it says this: Amaziah did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight, but not like his ancestor David. Instead, he followed the example of his father Joash. Amaziah did not destroy the pagan shrines, and the people still offered sacrifices and burned incense there. So Amaziah's reign began with justice. After his father Joash was assassinated, Amaziah, he struck down the conspirators there, but in obedience to the law of God he spared their children. In verse 6 it says this: However, he did not kill the children of the assassins, for he obeyed the command of the Lord as written by Moses in the book of the law that said, Parents must not be put to death for the sins of their children, nor children for the sins of their parents. Those deserving to die must be put to death for their own crimes. So Amaziah is trying to follow God's law when it came to that. He didn't put the children to death. So with his throne secured, Amaziah turns his attention to a military conquest. He marches out against the Edomites, and he claims a victory in the Valley of Salt, killing 10,000, claiming the city of Selah, and renaming it Joktheel. So flush with triumph, Amaziah's pride swells. He looks north towards Israel, and he sends a challenge to Israel's king. This challenge is in verse 8. He sends a challenge to Jehoash, the son of Jehoahaz, the grandson of Jehu. He says, Come and meet me in battle. But Jehoash, he mocked Amaziah with a parable. He says in verse 9, Out in the Lebanon mountains a thistle sent a message to a mighty cedar tree. Give your daughter in marriage to my son. But just then a wild animal of Lebanon came by and stepped on the thistle, crushing it. Now what in the world does that mean? Jehoash says that you've definitely beat Edom, and now you're starting to get arrogant from it. Glory in your victory while you can, but stay at home. He said, Why ask for trouble and cause downfall for that of Judah? He's basically saying, you don't want this smoke, dude. You don't want this. Don't even try it. Amaziah, unfortunately, he fails to listen. He refuses to listen. So a battle came between Judah and Israel, and they're clashing at a place called Beth Shemesh. And just as Jehoash predicted, Judah was defeated. King Amaziah, he was captured, and Jehoash marched to Jerusalem, breaking down 400 cubits of the city wall and looting the temple of the Lord and the royal palace. We see that here in verse 14. He carried off all the gold and silver and all the articles from the temple of the Lord. He also seized the treasures from the royal palace, along with hostages, and then returned to Samaria. So Amaziah, he actually lives for 15 more years, but his end, unfortunately, was not peaceful. Conspirators rose against him, and he fled to a place called Lachish. But his conspirators pursued him, and they killed him there. We see that in verse 20. It says, They brought his body back to Jerusalem on a horse, and he was buried with his ancestors in the city of David. So meanwhile, back in Israel, after Jehoash dies, his son Jeroboam II takes over as the king of Israel, and he rules for 41 years. Now you guessed it, he's not a righteous king either. In verse 24 it says that he did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to turn from the sins that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had led Israel to commit. But God still uses him to restore the borders of Israel from a place called Lebo Hamath to the Dead Sea, just as the prophet Jonah had foretold. And in verse 27 it says, And because the Lord had not said he would blot out the name of Israel completely, he used Jeroboam II to save the people. And at the end of this chapter, when Jeroboam II dies, we see that he's buried in Samaria and his son Zechariah succeeds him. So verse 14 shows us a tale of two kings, one in Israel and one in Judah. But between the two of them, we still see one constant, and that's an unchanging God. Amaziah had began his reign with justice, but he falls to pride. Jeroboam II rules with wickedness, but still somehow becomes a tool for God's mercy. So that's kind of interesting there, how that dynamic worked. I think this chapter shows us that God opposes the proud, but he also shows mercy to the broken. I think Amaziah's story shows us that partial obedience is still disobedience. Amaziah had started well. He obeyed the law of Moses when dealing with his father's murderers. He showed justice tempered with God's word, but his obedience had limits. See, he left the high places, or those altars of false gods, for the convenience, compromise, and cultural religion. How often are we like Amaziah, obedient where it's comfortable, but silent where it may be costly? So the challenge here for me is to not settle for almost obedience. God doesn't want outward conformity, he wants our whole hearts. And at the latter part of Amaziah's reign, we see that his pride led to his downfall. Amaziah had just won this great battle against Edom, but this victory goes to his head. He gets a big head. He tries to pick a fight with Israel, a battle that he was never really supposed to get into. And when Israel even warned him, "You don't want this smoke, you don't want this," he refused to listen. And what happens? He loses everything. His army, his freedom, and even his throne. How often are we letting pride rule our lives rather than prayer? How often do we rush into things not because God called us to it, but because we want to prove something? God's word warns us in Proverbs that pride leads to destruction. So we have to learn to be humble in victory and teachable in success. And then with Jeroboam II's story, we see that God's mercy is bigger than our mess. Jeroboam II was someone that was described as someone that did evil in the sight of the Lord, but yet God still used him. Why? God saw how bitterly everyone in Israel was suffering, and so he used Jeroboam II. Israel didn't deserve saving, but God acted anyways, because that's who he is. He's a God that sees suffering and hears the cries of the broken. God even showed mercy in the midst of the rebellion. I think for me and you, there might be times where we feel unworthy. Maybe our past is messy, our present is shaky, but God's mercy doesn't start when we get it all together. It starts when we call out to him. So here's what I got for today. Don't settle for half-hearted obedience. Don't let success turn into arrogance or pride. And never forget that God's mercy reaches deeper than our failures. Won't he do it?